Margaret Sullivan had always believed that kindness was the most beautiful dress a person could wear. At 32, she had spent the last 8 years as a pediatric nurse at St. Mary's Children's Hospital, where her gentle smile and warm green scrubs had become a source of comfort to countless families. Her days began before sunrise and ended long after sunset. Margaret lived in a small studio apartment across town, where she counted every dollar twice and mended her uniforms by hand when they began to fray. The work was demanding, but she had never questioned her calling. Caring for children was simply what her heart was meant to do. On this particular Tuesday morning, Margaret was tending to 4-year-old Emma Chen, a sweet little girl with blonde curls tied up in a small bun, who had been recovering from surgery for nearly 2 weeks. Emma clutched her worn teddy bear close to her chest, the same way she had since the day she arrived. "Nurse Margaret," Emma whispered, her voice still weak but filled with that innocent trust that only children possess. "When can I go home and play in my garden again?" Margaret adjusted Emma's blanket with practiced gentleness, her voice soft and reassuring. "Very soon, sweetheart. Your body is getting stronger every day. Before you know it, you'll be running around those flower beds again." What Margaret didn't know was that Emma's father, David Chen, had been watching these tender moments from the doorway for days. David was a successful architect in his early 40s, with kind eyes and an appreciation for the subtle ways people showed their character. He had noticed how Margaret stayed late to read Emma bedtime stories, how she remembered every child's favorite color, and how she never seemed to complain despite clearly working extra shifts. One evening, as Margaret was finishing her rounds, David approached her in the hallway. His voice carried the weight of a grateful parent. "Nurse Sullivan, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you've been an angel to our Emma. She talks about you constantly. Your stories, your gentle way of explaining things. I can't thank you enough." Margaret felt warmth spread across her cheeks. "Emma is a remarkable little girl, Mr. Chen. She makes my job a joy, truly." David paused thoughtfully, then continued. "I couldn't help but overhear you mentioning to another nurse that you haven't taken a real break in months. When was the last time you did something just for yourself?" The question caught Margaret off guard. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, a habit she'd had since childhood when she felt uncertain. "Well, there's always so much to do here. The children need consistent care and—" "That's exactly what I thought you'd say," David interrupted gently. "Emma is being discharged this Friday, and I'd like to take you to dinner. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated, just a quiet evening where someone else takes care of you for a change." Margaret's heart fluttered, but practical concerns immediately filled her mind. "That's incredibly kind, Mr. Chen, but I couldn't possibly—" "Please," David said, his voice earnest. "Call me David. And before you say no, I want you to know this isn't charity. This is one person recognizing another person's goodness and wanting to celebrate it." That night, Margaret sat in her small apartment, staring at the single dress hanging in her closet. A simple navy blue one she'd bought 3 years ago for her nursing school graduation. It was presentable but worn, with a small mend near the hem where she'd caught it on a hospital cart. She thought about David's invitation and felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety she hadn't experienced in years. When had she last been asked on a proper dinner date? When had someone looked at her and seen more than just the nurse in green scrubs? Friday arrived with unusual swiftness. As Margaret prepared for Emma's discharge, the little girl hugged her teddy bear and looked up with bright eyes. "Nurse Margaret, Daddy says you're going to have dinner with us. Will you tell me more stories?" Margaret knelt to Emma's level, her voice gentle but clear. "Actually, sweetheart, your daddy and I are going to have a grown-up dinner tonight. But I want you to know that taking care of you has been one of the greatest privileges of my life." Emma nodded solemnly, then whispered, "Daddy says you work too hard and need someone to be nice to you. I think he's right." Later that evening, Margaret stood in front of her bathroom mirror, wearing her navy dress and wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. She had never been comfortable being the center of attention, preferring to fade into the background where she could focus on caring for others. When David arrived to pick her up, he paused at her doorway. He was dressed simply in dark slacks and a light blue button-down shirt, holding a small wrapped gift box with a navy blue ribbon. "Margaret, you look lovely," he said sincerely. "But before we go anywhere, I have something for you." "David, you really didn't need to. Please, just open it." With trembling fingers, Margaret untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant shaped like a stethoscope, but crafted so beautifully it looked more like fine jewelry than medical equipment. "I had this made by a friend who's a jeweler," David explained quietly. "I wanted you to have something that honors who you are, someone who listens to hearts, both literally and figuratively." Margaret felt tears gathering in her eyes. "David, I can't accept something so beautiful." "Yes, you can," he said gently, stepping forward to fasten the necklace around her neck. "You spend every day giving pieces of yourself to families like mine. Tonight, let someone give something back to you." The restaurant David had chosen was warm and unpretentious. A small Italian place with soft lighting and the kind of atmosphere that encouraged quiet conversation. As they settled into their booth, Margaret felt her shoulders relax for the first time in months. "Tell me about yourself, Margaret," David said after they'd ordered. "What made you want to become a pediatric nurse?" Margaret smiled, her fingers unconsciously touching the pendant at her throat. "I suppose I've always believed that children see the world with a kind of clarity that adults lose somewhere along the way. When Emma asks me why she needs medicine, she really wants to understand. When she's scared, she doesn't hide it behind pride or pretense. There's something pure about caring for someone who trusts you completely." David listened intently, struck by the thoughtfulness in her voice. "Emma told me you read her stories every night, even on your days off." "She's been away from home for 2 weeks," Margaret said simply. No child should fall asleep in a hospital feeling forgotten. As the evening progressed, Margaret found herself sharing stories she hadn't told anyone in years. About her childhood in a small Ohio town, about her decision to move to the city for nursing school, about the families who had touched her life in the pediatric ward. David, in turn, spoke about his work designing community spaces, about raising Emma as a single father since his wife's passing 3 years earlier, and about how watching Margaret care for his daughter had reminded him of the importance of gentleness in the world. "You know," David said as they shared dessert, "Emma asked me yesterday if I thought you were lonely. It struck me that a 4-year-old could see something I almost missed." Margaret set down her fork, considering his words. "I suppose I've gotten so used to focusing on other people's needs that I forgot I might have some of my own." "Well," David said with a warm smile, "I hope this is just the beginning of remembering." As they walked back to Margaret's apartment building, the city seemed quieter than usual, as if the evening had wrapped itself around them in a comfortable silence. At her door, David took her hands gently. "Margaret, I want you to know that tonight wasn't about pity or obligation. You're a remarkable woman, and I'd very much like to see you again, if you'd be willing." Looking into his kind eyes, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The possibility of being cared for as deeply as she cared for others. "I'd like that very much, David," she said softly. "Thank you for reminding me that kindness works both ways." As Margaret prepared for bed that night, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was the same person who had put on scrubs that morning, but something fundamental had shifted. She had remembered what it felt like to be seen, to be valued, to be worthy of someone else's thoughtful attention. The silver pendant caught the light as she turned, a beautiful reminder that sometimes, when we spend our lives caring for others, the universe finds a way to send someone to care for us in return. And in that moment, Margaret understood that the most beautiful dress she could wear wasn't made of fabric at all. It was woven from the recognition that every person, including herself, deserves to be treated with tenderness and respect.